What if everything you've been taught about success, wealth, and power was a lie? Imagine a world where every billboard, every advertisement, every glowing screen screams the same message. You are not enough. You need more. You must consume. We spend our lives chasing promotions, possessions, and praise, convinced that these are the keys to happiness. Yet, no matter how much we accumulate, the feeling of emptiness never goes away. Something in us whispers that this endless pursuit is a trap, yet we follow the crowd anyway, blinded by the illusion of progress. Now, consider a man who refused to follow that path. Diogenes of Sinope, a philosopher of ancient Greece, walked against the current of his society. He lived in a barrel, owned almost nothing, and deliberately flouted the social norms of wealth, status, and respectability. While others scrambled for power and prestige, he questioned the very foundation of desire itself. He roamed the streets with a lantern in broad daylight, claiming he was searching for an honest man. He mocked kings, scholars, and merchants alike, exposing the absurdity of a world enslaved by appearances and material obsession. Diogenes' life was not about eccentricity, it was about liberation. He demonstrated that strength does not lie in what you own, in how much you command, or in the status you amass. True strength is the courage to free yourself from the chains of desire, to live unbound by the expectations of others. In a society that equates accumulation with power, he showed that letting go can be the most radical, most powerful act of all. And so, the question arises, what if the path to strength, freedom, and authenticity is not through more, but through less? What if living simply is the strongest thing you can do? Diogenes was born in 412 BCE, in a world both brilliant and brutal, the city-states of ancient Greece. Athens was a place of towering ambition, political intrigue, and philosophical innovation. Yet beneath its glittering surface lay corruption, greed, and vanity. It was a society obsessed with reputation, wealth, and appearances, where the value of a person was measured not by their wisdom, but by the possessions they accumulated and the influence they wielded. In this environment, Diogenes emerged, not as a scholar cloistered in debate halls, but as a living question mark, a challenge to everything his society held sacred. He was a founder of a school of thought that rejected conventional desires for wealth, power, and social approval. To Diogenes, virtue and freedom were inseparable, and they could only be attained through simplicity and self-sufficiency. He lived what he preached. He slept in a barrel, ate what was necessary, and wore minimal clothing, embracing poverty not as a misfortune but as a deliberate path to independence. Every act of his life was a demonstration, a philosophical experiment, meant to expose the emptiness of material obsession and social pretense. Stories of his confrontations with authority became legendary. When Plato praised humans as featherless bipeds, Diogenes plucked a chicken and declared, "Behold, a man." He openly challenged kings, including Alexander the Great, who reportedly offered him anything he desired. Diogenes' reply was simple: "Stand out of my sunlight." These anecdotes were not mere eccentricities. They were carefully orchestrated provocations meant to reveal the absurdity of power, wealth, and human pride. He stripped away illusions to expose the raw, unadorned reality of life, that freedom and virtue are worth infinitely more than gold or title. Philosophically, Diogenes' message was radical, yet profoundly simple. True strength, he argued, comes not from controlling others, nor from amassing possessions, but from mastering oneself. Desire is the source of human suffering, and the less one clings to it, the more resilient and free one becomes. He demonstrated that the external trappings of society, luxury, acclaim, and influence, are distractions, cages disguised as achievements. By rejecting them, Diogenes achieved a form of power inaccessible to kings and politicians, the power to define his own life, to live authentically, and to remain untouched by society's illusions. In a world obsessed with accumulation, Diogenes' life was a mirror held up to humanity, reflecting both our folly and the path to liberation. He reminds us that the truest strength is not measured by what you have, but by what you can let go. And perhaps, in the pursuit of freedom and clarity, there is no greater courage than the courage to live simply, despite living over 2 millennia ago. Diogenes' lessons resonate more profoundly today than ever. Modern society has perfected the art of keeping humans in chains, not with iron, but with desire. From the moment we wake to the moment we sleep, we are bombarded with stimuli designed to make us feel incomplete, inadequate, or restless. Social media feeds, endless advertisements, and the subtle pressures of comparison trigger a psychological loop that most people never notice. We chase possessions, prestige, and validation, yet satisfaction is fleeting. No promotion, no luxury car, no viral post can fill the emptiness that comes from a mind enslaved to craving. Psychologists call this the hedonic treadmill. The human brain adapts rapidly to pleasure, so each new acquisition or accomplishment quickly becomes the baseline for dissatisfaction. Happiness is temporary, desire is insatiable, and the cycle repeats endlessly. The more we consume, the more we want, until the accumulation becomes a trap. Social comparison amplifies this effect. We measure ourselves not by our own values, but by the curated lives of others. The pursuit of wealth, beauty, and status becomes less about actual need and more about proving our worth in a world that constantly tells us we are not enough. Diogenes understood this intuitively. He saw that external approval, material wealth, and societal prestige were illusions that distract from true strength. By rejecting these illusions, he freed himself from the psychological chains that bind ordinary people. He chose simplicity not as punishment, but as a strategy, a way to master desire rather than be mastered by it. Modern neuroscience confirms this ancient wisdom. When we reduce attachment to external rewards and cultivate contentment within, our stress decreases, our focus sharpens, and our freedom grows. Yet few embrace this path because desire is seductive, almost addictive. Every advertisement, every social cue, every cultural norm whispers, more is better. You are not enough. We willingly participate, often without realizing we are trapped. Materialism is not merely a habit, it is a system designed to exploit psychological vulnerabilities, keeping individuals productive but perpetually dissatisfied. In essence, society profits from our suffering, and in our ignorance, we reward it. Diogenes' radical simplicity offers a mirror to this modern predicament. His barrel was more than a home, it was a symbol of independence, a declaration that the human mind can remain untethered even when the world demands servitude. In a time when the lines between need and desire are deliberately blurred, his philosophy teaches that strength lies in discernment, in recognizing what is essential, letting go of what is not, and refusing to let society dictate the measure of one's life. True freedom, he demonstrated, is the ability to say enough in a world that constantly whispers more. Simplicity is often misunderstood as weakness, austerity, or lack of ambition. Yet, when examined closely, it emerges as one of the most potent forms of power a human can wield. True strength is rarely measured by the accumulation of wealth, the sway over others, or the grandeur of possessions. Instead, it is measured by autonomy, clarity of mind, and the courage to resist the gravitational pull of society's endless demands. Diogenes lived this principle centuries ago, but its relevance has never been greater. Philosophically, simplicity is the liberation of the mind from external control. The less one depends on validation, status, or material comfort, the less one becomes a servant to forces beyond their control. In rejecting luxury and social approval, Diogenes demonstrated an independence inaccessible to kings, merchants, and politicians. His strength was invisible yet absolute, rooted in self-mastery, resilience, and the refusal to be shaped by the expectations of others. In essence, simplicity transforms scarcity into abundance. The fewer possessions and desires one has, the greater the freedom to act, think, and live authentically. Practically, the advantages of simplicity are equally profound. In a world that glorifies busyness and consumption, living with less sharpens focus and reduces distraction. Time, energy, and attention, the most valuable currencies, are no longer consumed by the pursuit of unnecessary goods or approval. By embracing simplicity, one gains clarity of purpose and the mental space to cultivate creativity, empathy, and meaningful relationships. Studies in behavioral psychology reinforce this. People who prioritized experiences and values over possessions consistently report higher levels of satisfaction, emotional resilience, and a sense of control over their lives. Simplicity also serves as a shield against manipulation. Modern society thrives on the perpetuation of desire, keeping individuals in cycles of debt, stress, and comparison. The less one clings to these societal metrics, the more immune they become to external pressure. Rejecting the need for constant affirmation or material accumulation does not make one powerless, makes one untouchable. capable of defining their own path regardless of societal expectation. In a subtle but profound way, simplicity is rebellion. It is a declaration that the individual cannot be bought, measured, or controlled. Across cultures and eras, philosophers, mystics, and thinkers have echoed Diogenes' principle. The path to true strength is often the path of less. From Stoics like Seneca and Epictetus to modern minimalists and mindfulness practitioners, simplicity emerges as a strategy for living with courage, integrity, and clarity. It is the ultimate paradox. By having less, one gains everything. By letting go, one achieves mastery. And in a society obsessed with accumulation, the choice to simplify becomes not just a lifestyle, but a radical act of power and freedom. While Diogenes lived over 2,000 years ago, his radical principles are not relics of history, they echo profoundly in the modern world. Across cultures, there are individuals and movements quietly embodying the same power of simplicity he championed, showing that liberation from desire is not only possible, but transformative. Consider the rise of minimalism. Writers, entrepreneurs, and digital nomads deliberately strip their lives of excess. They reject the constant pressure to acquire more, choosing instead to focus on purpose, creativity, and personal freedom. Their power is subtle yet undeniable. By needing less, they can move faster, think clearer, and pursue their goals without the invisible chains of societal expectation. Take, for example, a modern whistleblower, someone willing to expose corruption at great personal risk. They often live minimally, unentangled from material distractions, guided by principle rather than profit. Their freedom allows them to act courageously, without fear of societal reprisal or financial coercion. In a similar vein, certain modern spiritual teachers, artists, and innovators embrace simplicity as a tool to cultivate clarity and impact. By living lightly in material terms, they free themselves to explore, create, and challenge conventions, achieving forms of influence that those obsessed with accumulation rarely touch. Even beyond individuals, entire movements reflect Diogenes' ethos. Intentional communities, eco-villages, and voluntary simplicity networks prioritize experience, community, and purpose over wealth and status. Participants often report greater satisfaction, resilience, and mental peace than their peers trapped in conventional consumerist cycles. In each case, simplicity is not poverty, is a conscious act of resistance against the system designed to exploit desire. A declaration of autonomy over one's life. History and modern examples converge to reveal a striking truth. Society measures power by accumulation, but the strongest form of influence is invisible, internal, and unshakable. By rejecting the illusion that more is inherently better, individuals regain control over their attention, their energy, and their values. They are no longer vulnerable to manipulation or societal pressure, because their worth is self-defined. In this light, Diogenes' barrel becomes a metaphor for modern liberation, a reminder that the trappings of society are optional, and that true strength resides in mastery of self rather than dominion over others. The lessons are clear. Living simply is not a retreat from life, but a deeper engagement with it. By reducing attachment to external approval, material wealth, and social comparison, individuals gain clarity, resilience, and freedom. They discover a power that cannot be bought, sold, or taken away. In a world where most are enslaved by desire, choosing simplicity is not weakness. It is one of the most radical, courageous, and transformative acts a person can commit. Simplicity, for all its power, is often misunderstood. Many assume that to live simply is to live poorly, to sacrifice comfort, or to abandon ambition. In reality, simplicity is neither poverty nor weakness. It is a deliberate choice, a conscious act of liberation. Yet most people recoil at the idea because it challenges deeply ingrained fears and social conditioning. We are taught from birth that more is better, that possessions equal status, and that approval from others defines our value. To reject these assumptions is to stand against the current of culture, a move that requires courage few are willing to summon. Fear is the first barrier. People worry that letting go of material security or social recognition will leave them vulnerable, powerless, or irrelevant. They imagine a life of deprivation rather than a life of freedom. Yet, Diogenes' example demonstrates that the opposite is true. Detachment from society's metrics of worth cultivates resilience, independence, and clarity. When your sense of self is no longer bound to approval, praise, or possession, you cannot be easily shaken. True power emerges not from accumulation, but from autonomy. Another obstacle is ego. Desire is fueled by the belief that happiness must be earned externally, that without wealth, status, or recognition, we are incomplete. Simplicity confronts this illusion directly, forcing individuals to question their motivations, confront their insecurities, and recognize the invisible chains that govern their behavior. It is uncomfortable precisely because it exposes what most people refuse to see, that much of human suffering is self-inflicted, the product of relentless comparison and attachment. Societal resistance is equally formidable. A world built on consumption, competition, and distraction often mocks, marginalizes, or punishes those who reject its norms. Minimalists, philosophers, and intentional simplifiers frequently encounter misunderstanding, ridicule, or even hostility. Yet this opposition underscores the radical nature of simplicity. It is a threat to systems that rely on desire to control, distract, and manipulate. Choosing simplicity is, in effect, an act of rebellion, a quiet but profound refusal to be governed by invisible forces. Ultimately, the obstacles to simplicity are not external, they are internal. Fear, ego, and conditioning are the true barriers. Recognizing this is the first step toward liberation. By confronting these internal forces, one can begin to experience the paradoxical strength that Diogenes exemplified, a life unshackled, focused, and resilient, powered not by possessions or approval, but by freedom of mind and clarity of purpose. Embracing simplicity may sound abstract, even intimidating, but it begins with small, deliberate steps. It is less about renouncing the world entirely and more about reclaiming control over your attention, energy, and values. The first step is awareness, recognizing where your life is dominated by desire, distraction, or social pressure. Observe what you own, what you consume, and why you seek approval. Ask yourself, are these possessions and pursuits genuinely fulfilling, or are they feeding someone else's system? Awareness is the foundation of choice, and choice is the gateway to freedom. Next comes decluttering, not just of physical space, but of digital, mental, and emotional clutter. Our lives are saturated with stimuli, notifications, advertisements, social comparisons, and obligations we never consciously chose. By simplifying your environment, limiting digital noise, and consciously curating what enters your mind, you create the space to focus on what truly matters. This clarity allows you to engage deeply with your work, your relationships, and your purpose, unshackled by distraction. Financial simplicity is another powerful tool. Examine your spending habits and distinguish between needs and desires. Reduce debt, limit consumption, and prioritize resources for experiences and values rather than possessions or status symbols. Paradoxically, financial restraint often brings freedom, fewer obligations, less stress, and more flexibility to live according to your principles rather than society's expectations. Simplicity also requires cultivating inner resilience. Meditation, reflection, and journaling help you observe cravings, insecurities, and impulses without being controlled by them. By turning inward, you strengthen the mind's ability to resist external manipulation, reduce anxiety, and increase clarity. Simplicity is as much psychological as it is practical. It trains you to find contentment and purpose within yourself rather than in fleeting material or social rewards. Finally, simplicity thrives in conscious relationships and intentional living. Surround yourself with people who value depth, integrity, and authenticity rather than status, consumption, or approval. Pursue projects, hobbies, and endeavors that resonate with your inner values, not those dictated by societal trends. Each choice, each act of conscious reduction, reinforces a life of freedom, focus, and quiet power. The journey towards simplicity is gradual, often challenging, yet profoundly rewarding. It is a form of strength, invisible to the world, but unshakable in practice. Every step away from unnecessary attachment, every moment of mindful restraint, is a reclaiming of your autonomy, a reclaiming of the freedom that Diogenes embodied centuries ago. In learning to live with less, you discover the paradoxical truth. In letting go, you gain everything that truly matters. In a world that measures success by accumulation, Diogenes reminds us that the greatest power lies not in what we possess, but in what we are willing to release. His life, radical yet simple, offers a profound mirror to our own, a society obsessed with wealth, status, and external validation often leaves the mind restless, the spirit constrained, and the heart unfulfilled. Yet freedom, resilience, and clarity are available to those who dare to let go of these illusions. The lesson is clear. Simplicity is not deprivation, nor is it a retreat from life's richness. On the contrary, it is an embrace of the fullness that comes from autonomy, self-mastery, and purpose. By shedding unnecessary desire, we reclaim the most precious resources of ultimate focus and the freedom to define our own path. In living simply, we discover strength that cannot be measured in currency or applause, but in courage, clarity, and authenticity. Modern life constantly tests our attachment, whispering that more is better and that we must conform to expectations. But the practice of simplicity offers an antidote. It teaches us to pause, reflect, and choose deliberately. It shows that happiness and power are not found in accumulation, but in mastery over one's mind and desires. The barrel that Diogenes called home becomes a symbol not of poverty, but of liberation, not of weakness, but of unshakable inner strength. Ultimately, the courage to live simply is the courage to live freely. It is the refusal to allow society, culture, or desire to dictate your worth. It is the decision to value clarity over clutter, purpose over prestige, and authenticity over approval. Diogenes' life stands as a challenge and an invitation to question everything we have been taught about success, to confront the invisible chains that govern our behavior, and to discover the profound power of restraint. And so, the question remains for each of us: are we willing to let go, to shed the superfluous, and to live a life defined by our own values rather than the world's illusions? Because in that choice lies the strongest form of strength imaginable, the freedom to be fully, unapologetically ourselves.